What you want to do is you want to invest at 7 o'clock. Now, a lot of people go, yeah, great. Wouldn't you want to invest at six, right at the bottom? You would, but it's hard to pick. The Victorian government, in their great wisdom, has put in a lot of restrictions, a lot of taxes for investors. And 33% is quite high because really you can't really push much more than that because then suddenly where are you going to rent? The government loves immigration, especially the Labor government. I think Dutton is more pro slowing it down, but with the immigration the way it is at the moment, we just don't have enough houses. You look at what's happened is you need more income to buy a property now than you ever had to do in the past. This is the biggest gap in history. So if you look back from 1988, and you can go further all the way to the beginning of Australia, and you can see that there's never been this sort of discrepancy ever before. It's the worst it's ever been. So the same government that actually wants us to build more houses is getting all the supplies, all the materials, and all the people and putting them into big projects. And they've got an unlimited budget, much bigger than what everyone else has got. And that is the challenge. This is the strange thing. Australia can no longer manufacture windows for homes. It's actually cheaper to build a house or a townhouse than it is an apartment. The same person that could borrow 497, if we assess it at 2.5% serviceability buffer, which is, I think, is a fair amount at the moment with the interest rates we got, and we don't include the debt of the HEX debt, then it's actually, they can borrow 613,000, which is much better. Okay, guys, me and my team are about to go live, so make sure you grab your beverage of choice, sit down, and you're in for an amazing show. Okay, hello and welcome. George Markoski here, Positive Property Show, coming to you live. And what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about Australian housing crisis and how it's gotten worse. Let's talk about that. And I'm just going to share my screen. And yeah, so a lot has been happening. Actually, Kim, can you jump in and share your screen? That will save me from doing it because me and technology are really good friends. We're like really close. But Kim, she's really good. Okay, so the Australia's housing shortage worsens. So, bit of bad news, but let's talk about this. Now, before we talk about this, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about Brisbane's house price boom. And many of our members, you're on right now, listening and you're on here now, you've experienced it because you've bought properties and they've gone up. But look at this chart, which is fascinating. So you look at um, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, Hobart, Darwin, Canberra. That's our main capital cities. And what I want to do is just go through those and just show you what's been happening. So Sydney's gone backwards, but the last 5 years, Sydney's done 28%. Then Melbourne has done 8.2% in the last 5 years. That's how much growth. But look at Brisbane, 69%, Adelaide 73, Perth 75. Now, you'll notice something here. Where have we been investing? We've been investing mainly in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth. Now, everyone's probably familiar with the property clock, but I'll talk about the property clock because the property clock's very important when you're investing in property because you don't want to invest at 12 o'clock, which is a peak. What you want to do is you want to invest at 7 o'clock. Now, a lot of people go, yeah, great. Wouldn't you want to invest at six, right at the bottom? You would, but it's hard to pick. And because you don't know where the bottom is, if you try to invest at six, you might be investing at 4 or 5 o'clock and the prices continually drop and you start losing equity. So because of that, what we want to do is we want to wait for price to recover. And then we know once about a few quarters of growth that there's a bounce back. And once we join the bounce back, we've invested seven because then we know our property is going to go up and not go down. And that's pretty important. But you can see Melbourne has been very average. Okay, we're going to get to the next slide. So this is the investment properties bought by Victorians. And you can see that graph. It's gone right down from 2020 all the way to 24. And why is this? This is because the Victorian government, in their great wisdom, has put in a lot of restrictions, a lot of taxes for investors. So basically, the restrictions and taxes for the investors in Melbourne is constrictive once you have multiple properties. If you only got one or two, it's okay. But when you start getting multiple, it makes it more difficult. So where Victorians have bought interstate investment properties. Now, if you look at this graph from 2020, the black is Queensland, the dark blue is New South Wales, and the blue is WA and SA. And as you can see, the graph keeps going up. And, 2020, 21, 22, 23, it was quite sort of stable, but we had a massive surge in Queensland over 2024. And you look at the increase in median advertised rents, right? What's been happening there? Basically, the March quarter 2020 to December quarter 2024. So over the last 4 years, the median advertised rents has gone up in Sydney, regional Sydney, everywhere. But you notice one thing, that regional NT hasn't gone up much. And that's because there's still a lot of empty properties and there was no reason for it to go up. Queensland affordability over time, affordable share of rentals. This is just showing affordability over time, and it really, affordability has gone down in the 50% mark there a little bit, obviously because rents have gone up. And the percentage of rent, of income spent on rent, has gone up in Australia. Now, you look at this, funny enough, back in 2005, there was a big peak. Then it dropped in 2006. Then it went up. And then percentage of income compared to rents was slowly going down for a long time. And now it's gone back up to a new peak. And 33% is quite high because really you can't really push much more than that because then suddenly where are you going to rent? Rental affordability index is the worst rent affordability on record. And part of this I'm going to talk about later is because construction costs have gone up, properties have gone up, interest rates have gone up, immigration has gone up. Now you've got all those things that are powering this. And then when you've got that many things, it's hard. Yeah. So the one reason Melbourne is because of the land taxes. And that's when you got multiple properties. Median advertised rents has gone up. Yeah. So one of the main things that's causing this housing crisis to get worse is immigration. And the government loves immigration, especially the Labor government. I think Dutton is more pro slowing it down. But with the immigration the way it is at the moment, we just don't have enough houses. And that puts a lot of pressure on infrastructure, on houses, on everything. And you look at the capital city population forecasts, especially when you look at the big four or four, they're all going to go up. You look at Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Hobart, Darwin, Canberra aren't going to go up as much. But yeah, that's what's happening. But I think you look at if you go back to that graph, you look at Adelaide and it looks like it's not going to go up that much. I believe that that graph is probably wrong. And I'd say Adelaide's going to go up more than what they think. And the reason being is once Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, if they become unaffordable, then more people are going to go to Adelaide because that's what happens between those four cities. Because people are happy to swap around. Because a lot of people during COVID moved from Melbourne to Adelaide and moved from Melbourne to Brisbane, right? Perth didn't get much people because it's further away and people don't want to move that far. National dwelling value to income ratio. So what this graph shows is that you look at what's happened is you need more income to buy a property now than you ever had to do in the past. Now, this is a worldwide phenomena. So what's happened since COVID and we had all the inflation going up? Inflation has pushed everything to become harder to get. So basically, incomes haven't gone up as much as the inflation. And because of that, they're lagged behind. This is what's happening. So what needs to happen is incomes need to go up. Will they go up? Yes, they will catch up, but they lag behind and don't catch up as fast. That's just the way it is. But you can see in the graph, in the past, we've had ups and downs before. Dwelling improves Australia. So this is the thing that's our challenge, right? So in January, only 15,142 homes were approved for construction. That's nearly 25% less than Albanese government's housing target of 20,000. Right. So in the last 12 months, 174 thousand homes were approved. That's still around 65,000 less properties than what we need for the 12 months. And if you look at it, 65,000 properties is a lot of properties. That's a massive because, 30% below the target is huge. And now we're going to look at dwelling construction population change. There's an enormous gap between demand, population growth, and supply, construction rates. So the gap is huge. It's the biggest gap we've ever had. And this is what is fueling the house boom and house prices, this gap, because everything comes down to supply and demand when it comes down to it in a capitalist society. So this one graph paints 1,000 stories, and this is very important to notice because you can see very clearly the population, and then you look at approvals, commencement, and completions. So the green graph is population change. It's gone down a little bit, but you look at the commencements, that's the red graph, way down. You look at approvals, way down, and look at completions. It's terrible. So we're looking at, 550,000 of demand, but 250, 300,000 supply. This is the biggest gap in history. So if you look back from 1988, and you can go further, all the way to the beginning of Australia, if you look back and you can see that there's never been this sort of discrepancy ever before. It's the worst it's ever been. And until this equals, until it connects, it's going to be like that. Now, the good news is, before I go on to this, is at least interest rates have gone down a bit by 0.25 in February, and they're expected to fall by 1% this year, which is going to make a difference. But you can see residential construction costs are very expensive. Now, why is this? Well, part of it is because of the supply problem and materials and everything else becoming more expensive because of inflation. But there's something else that's important here too that we need to look at, which is unsaid. But basically, the government's doing the big build infrastructure projects, and they're taking all the labor and resources away from home building. So the same government that actually wants us to build more houses is getting all the supplies, all the materials, and all the people and putting them into big projects. And they've got an unlimited budget, much bigger than what everyone else has got. And that is the challenge. Now, I'm not against infrastructure spending. I think it's great. But what we need to do is balance it out over years to balance it out with the residential construction. Construction insolvencies have gone up, and that's part of the reason. Auction clearance rates for price growth. As you can see, they're very close. Now, what happened recently is we had a 0.25% reduction in interest rates. Auction clearance rates went up. Property prices rebounded within a week, which I'm amazed that they rebounded that quick, especially in Sydney. So that's what happened, right? And this is the auction statistics. I'm not going to bore you this. This is a bit of the other homework that I'll do in the background. The cash rate. So this is the official cash rate. You can see where we are historically from 2005. Good to know. And we've had a little bit of a drop. And unfortunately, the RBA have cooled the April rate cut hopes. They've decided they're not going to cut the rate in April. They've said they're not going to do it, and they probably won't, which sucks. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. But really, what we need to do is you see that blue line that's gone all the way up. We need to drop it by 50%. That's what needs to happen. And the fact of it is, the quicker we can get it there, the better, because really then they were all paying way too much money. And that's contributing to our inflation. You can see our trim mean inflation is less than 3%. And the RBA have said less than 3%, that's when they drop rates. Excuse me. That employment rate. That employment rate at the moment is the lowest we've ever had, which is amazing when you consider the amount of immigration we've got and our employment rate is low. So this also is a sign of why property prices keep going up because everyone's got a job, everyone's making money. If you look at back in the 2000s, we had 11% unemployment. and we still had property prices go up at 11%, even though we had the Asian crisis and everything else like that. Retail sales are bouncing back up. Now, this is the strange thing. Australia can no longer manufacture windows for homes. So Australia's last major plastics manufacturer closed last year due to high energy costs. And now Australia is wholly reliant on imported plastics from China, right? So this is a bit of a challenge. But I'll tell you why it's happening in the next slide. Because if you look at this graph and you look at the start of LNG exports, once we started exporting gas, because we use gas in a lot of manufacturing, that our gas costs have tripled, even though we actually got the resource here and one of the biggest gas producers in the world, which is ridiculous. If you go to Qatar, who are very big at gas as well, their gas is dirt cheap. But for some reason, we pay way too much. And that's part of the reason is the exports absorb the production growth because that's where they make money. And our housing construction is too high. You can see all the different places. Now, this is interesting. The next slide is very interesting if we go to the next slide. If you look at the construction costs and you look at construction costs and apartment values, they're equal right now. Values of apartments are slightly higher than what it costs to replace them. So they're just very expensive. So if we look at the next graph, now look at this. This is very interesting. So on the left, there's a graph. Now, the blue is apartments, the red is detached houses, and the grey is townhouses. And we're talking here the costs to build. Now, look at this. This is fascinating. It's actually cheaper to build a house or a townhouse than it is an apartment. So there lies why you think that we invest mainly in townhouses and house and land is because they're very good value. Yeah. So that's the thing. Most apartments are 2 bedrooms and we've got a lot of them, but they've stopped building them now. So we're even going to have a reduction in supply of apartments as well. Now, the thing is, the average Australian doesn't want to live in an apartment. They prefer living in a house or a townhouse. But the people from overseas, they don't mind. They're used to it. Our population projections, you can see we're going to have a big population. We're going to have a lot of people. Imagine this, we're going to have 44 million people by 2072 here in Australia. So the Aussie banks are fighting over mortgage lending rules where NAB, they want to reduce the requirements and other ones that keep it tough. Now, I'll show you what that means in the next slide. This is the maximum borrowing amount. So this is a scenario and the maximum borrowing amount, how it affects you. So with current situation, someone that can borrow 497,000, if we change and assess them on 2.75% serviceability buffer. So what a serviceability buffer is this. So whatever the interest rate is now, what they do is they add 2.75% on top of the interest rate to make sure that you can afford the loan. Now, considering that we've got the highest interest rates we've ever had at the moment, adding 2.75 doesn't make sense. I understood that that made a lot of sense when our interest rates were low 5 years ago. It was very important because we needed this buffer. So once we got here, people could afford it. But at the moment, interest rates are high. So then if you reduce that buffer even more, 2.5, then your borrowing capacity goes to 518,000. And now, if we take out the HECS debt, goes to 587. And if you look at the bottom scenario, the same person that could borrow 497, if we assess it at 2.5% serviceability buffer, which is, I think, is a fair amount at the moment with the interest rates we got, and we don't include the debt of the HEX debt, then it's actually, they can borrow 613,000, which is much better. And this may happen in the future. I think borrowing is going to become easier. I think NAB are going to win this war because it's too tight. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to having a buffer, we need to look at the interest rate and work out what we need. And when we've got low interest rates, we need a bigger buffer. We've got a high interest rate, you need a smaller buffer. Makes sense. Okay. So there's my state of the nation and just telling you what's going on at the moment in the world. Now, I'm going to go through the chat and have a look at the messages. I'll answer your questions and then we're going to do a breakout room and That's it for today. So let's have a look here. We can't build 1 million properties a year. No, we can't. Dutton said immigration will stay at 140,000 per year. There's no big cuts in immigration anytime soon. Okay, there you go. I thought he was going to cut it. Oh, by the way, I want to say goodbye to the public group. We're going back in the inner group now that we're reading out the questions.